Let's take a look at some of the highlights with the three members of our all-star European team, Johnson, Francine Lacqua, and Jonathan at Ferro. Francine, let's start with you.
Yeah, we're sad, but we're happy to get out of the cold, actually.
Cold? Do you think it's cold?
We had an amazing 3 days, thanks to Mario Draghi and that historical QE being pumped in. Now, today we had a great interview with the Japan Central Bank Governor, Haruhiko Kuroda, and I asked him whether, the central bank divergence. So you have the ECB going one way, you have Japan going one way, and then in the opposite direction, you definitely have the UK and possibly the Fed. And I asked him whether that was problematic. He said, no, actually, anything that can spur growth in Europe will help his economy. Let's have a listen.
By this action by the European Central Bank, deflationary pressures would be eradicated and economic growth could be accelerated. Both of them would be beneficial to the world economy, including the Japanese economy. So we very much welcome this action by the European Central Bank.
So I don't know what you think. 90% of people here thought that it was a great idea that the ECB had done this. There's always a 10% though, isn't it? And that 10% generally here has had a German accent. Axel Weber, former Bundesbank boss, definitely leading the charge in terms of saying, you know what, this isn't a good idea, this isn't going to work. He was pretty clear in the fact that he thought this wasn't a good idea.
QE program that focuses on buying non-market paper, buying sovereign paper, in my view, doesn't actually address the problem. It addresses an issue of market access and funding costs for sovereigns who can do many things, but sovereigns don't fund small, medium-priced enterprises either.
The German voice.
The German voice.
I mean, we did overhear actually a banker look at him and say, you see, because he was almost, he was touted to be the favorite to replace the previous president of the ECB. And they said, see, had you been in charge, this would not have happened.
But it didn't necessarily seem that even though so many people here supported it and thought it was the right move on the ECB's part, they didn't necessarily think it's going to work. And many have said, why hadn't it happened already?
I look to the other side of the pond, and I hate to change the discussion. We're all talking about the ECB. My big takeaway from Davos this year has been the overwhelming consensus that the US economy is standing alone and it's going to outperform. But when I listened to your panel, not everyone actually believes that, and not everyone thinks that this is the year for the first Federal Reserve rate hike since the financial crisis.
Well, that may be the case, but what you definitely do have coming from the American contingent, both from the private sector and the public sector, is a little bit of moral authority, frankly. And I wonder whether it rankles with the Europeans.
Never.
We should listen to what Steve...
What word did you just use?
Moral authority. Rankle?
Rankles.
Rankle. True Schatzker moment right there. Sorry.
We heard some of that from Steve Schwartzman. We heard some of that from David Rubenstein. Not overbearing, just this notion, perhaps, that the Europeans are taking, at the very least, acting too late and possibly not bringing out big enough guns. Maybe not only in the form of quantitative easing. Let's listen to Jack Lew, the Treasury Secretary, talking about what QE means.
Europe has been slower to pull all the levers into play. What we have been saying consistently is that Europe needs to use all the levers as well. They need to use fiscal policy, they need to use monetary policy, and they need to do structural reforms. So I think that in any country, over-reliance on one tool puts more burden on it than it should have, but all the levers have to be used.
So Jack Lew more or less saying, oh, the Europeans need to get their act in order, enact some fiscal reforms, enact some labor reforms.
Every time he comes over here, he basically comes over and says, well, this is what you guys have got to do, and the Europeans want to escape.
So I'm rubbing my hands because
they shrug their shoulders.
Because I love doing this. I love this moment because I look back to Ben Bernanke and the amount of money printing he's done, over $3 trillion, and I think about the US administration and how many laws you guys have passed and got through Congress. How many has it been? How much is that backlog? And I think that a lot of people talk here in Europe about us printing money and doing a bond buying programme at the ECB. And the German approach about how that would mean people lift off the pedal for reforms is a real argument. It's a real argument worth having. And one worth having that the US Federal Reserve and Ben Bernanke over the last 3-4 years has been the only game in town in the US.
So I'm. So
I see. Is still your takeaway?
Yeah. My takeaway is that when they come over to Europe and preach about how many changes Europe needs to make, I look to the US and wonder how much the US
When they come to Europe, they can preach to so many people because those people don't have jobs.
You're absolutely right. The Europeans did such a great job recapitalizing their banks. The stress tests were so credible.
An
example for the rest of the world.
It's getting hot out here.
That's what Axel Weber's point is. He's basically saying, you know what, the US, much more aggressive in recapitalising their banks. That's what they did right. That's what the Europeans have done wrong. Forget about QE. It's all about the banks.
The Europeans have 19 countries. 19 countries with 19 governments. They don't agree.
We're taking it to the bar. We're taking it to the bar.
It's difficult. It's political.